the Indigenous population, there's often many cultural myths or misconceptions people tend to have about the specific culture. If you guys each could bring forward a cultural myth or misconception that comes to mind that you've encountered personally and share an experience to provide the audience. Thank you.
Sure. So the stories I'm about to share, they might hit hard, but I really want to be able to take this opportunity to share some experiences that are pretty deep. For example, when I was in grade 4, so I didn't grow up right in the First Nation community in Kainai, but I did spend a lot of my summers there with my grandpa, the late Daniel Wiesemachason. So late Daniel Wiesemachason would take me out a lot and show me, point to the mountains, point to the river, pointing to the grass. And we would spend a lot of time together. And the funny thing is, he never spoke English. And it took me all these years to be able to look back and understand what he was telling me or what he was teaching me. So I took a lot of those lessons, like growing up. And one of them, for example, was in grade 4. So I'm in grade 4 and I'm not in class thinking, I'm First Nation, I'm from the Kainai community. I'm just thinking, we're all the same. Growing up in Medicine Hat, Alberta, being one of the only looking back, I know this, being one of the only First Nation families within the city. We had a spelling test. We were learning about First Nation people. And the word back then, what they would use was the word Indian. So we're learning about Indians. We're learning about teepees. We're learning about traditional food. So we're doing a spelling test, and one of the words that came up was Indian. So the teacher's at the front of the class, and we're all at our desks, and she says, Indian, the word that we need to spell. Then she would then use that word in a sentence. Indian. All Indians like to drink. Indian. And I knew something was wrong. I'm in grade 4, and it hit me in a way I can't explain. And we go out for recess, and my friends are coming up to me and asking me how I felt about that. And to be honest, I didn't truly know how to feel because it was different. I've never experienced this in my life. But I knew it hurt, and I knew it was wrong. The bell rings and we go back in from recess, and I'm called to the office. I'm talking to the principal. The principal asked me about what happened because my friends went to the office to say what had happened. And I'm thankful for that. And I told the principal what had happened. So it was a great learning experience, not only for myself, the teacher, but also the entire class. Another incident I had, even growing up or hearing about is that, First Nation people don't pay taxes. Well, we do. When I filled out my truck this morning, I definitely knew I paid taxes there. When I make purchases, whether it's personally or through my business or for a nonprofit, we're paying taxes. When I'm buying gifts for our kids at Christmas time, we're paying taxes. My home, we live in the North End, and I have to pay property tax. So there's these times when I know that there's definitely money leaving my account, leaving my pocket. So these are just some of the misconceptions, that I hear, often. Even starting my own business, I had a friend that said, it must be so nice to be able to have the grants available for you to start your First Nation business. But I was just like, I didn't say much, but I was just like, wow, like you don't know a whole lot. Like I had to bust my butt to be able to build a business, to build, what I have. And I know about, working hard because seven years ago, I battled alcohol addiction. I had nothing. I was on the verge of losing my family, my home, my business. I had nothing. I tried to commit suicide, and I woke up, and when I woke up after my failed suicide attempt, I went to a year-long treatment center. And it was at this place where I started really learning the value of really who I am. When I graduated this year-long program, I only had $280 in coins to my name. That was it. But I knew I needed to build something. At that time, I couldn't even run around the block, but now I'm running marathons. I didn't have any money. Now I do okay. I get to go to places. I get to help people. I get to do stuff like this. So those are just some of the myths, but I really find that, I love working hard, and I love to be able to combat all those myths and say, no grade 4 teacher, you're wrong.
That's really touching. Just trying to keep my emotion. Sorry, this COVID just makes your mood up and down when you're in a bubble and you don't see humans. You're the most humans I've seen in 2 years. The misconceptions, I'm going to focus on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and that's basically the stereotypes and racism and discrimination and targeting of Indigenous women. The stereotypes of being, being name called, because I've lived so long in the urban setting, you always hear women saying they're walking on the street and someone's calling them a squaw or dirty squaw, and you're hearing that, and I haven't experienced that, and I've been reflecting why I've never experienced that. And I think it's because our parents really overprotected us, and I've learned how to really be protective of where I walk and how far I walk, and I was that family picking up our husband, boyfriend, or whatever, friends, so I'm not in those situations. But for the women that do experience it, it's very hurtful. These people don't know who that person is, and then you have the historical during the fur trade where Victorian women were the ones that were submissive, and you have all these fur trading settlers come in and push their Victorian ideas on strong Indigenous women and starting to just miss their abilities and their strength and what they contribute to their family and their community. So when I think about the misconceptions, I always go back to that fur trade thinking, like when it first started and how do we combat it. It's not easy because it continues day in, day out. And it's really, really unfortunate that it continues, but I think in these kind of venues and conversations that we continue to keep lifting up women, especially in light of International Women's Day yesterday. And, I think the theme is break the bias. And, Indigenous women have a lot to offer, much stronger and resilient and loving and compassionate. But we've been hit by colonialism, by 60 Scoop, by the MIW, Indian Residential School. So it's had its intergenerational effects where our women have, a lot of us have low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and it's, you're trying to break cycles on a regular basis. And in our family, there's 9 girls, we're very strong women. The first half girls are fluid speakers, but there's alcoholism and drug use, and there's those dysfunctions. But in the end, when you take away the hurt and the trauma, the PTSD, you have that core, strong Indigenous woman that's still here. and survive. You know, it's just a really amazing, and the most amazing in this experience with MMIW, two-spirited, is the mothers, the aunts, the sisters, the cookums that survive that experience of the missing, found murdered, found the perpetrator, went to trial. Maybe they found their daughter and get to bury them, or their sister or aunt. Those are really strong, resilient women. And something in a weird way, spiritual, really comes over them that either enhances their current spiritual believing and practices, or it just brings it in. If they didn't have that, it really brings it up, and that's the beauty of being a woman. We have those abilities to, you know, get through the highs and lows with each other, and watching other cultures do the same. That's what I want to talk about with the misconceptions of Indigenous women.
Thank you, Darlene, and we'll pass it to Delia to end this question.
Thank you. What she just said reminded me of one of the cultural misconceptions that I faced in the past, not so much now, and I'll give 2 examples. One that I saw today, not today, but this week, but my own experience from the past, being in Saskatchewan. I left Saskatchewan when I was about 22 years old, but I can recall I was working in Regina, and I can recall walking down the street in Regina in the summertime, and it really bordered on racism. Just walking down the street with a friend innocently, and there were at least 2 men that approached me and went like that and went like this, assuming that I was an easy Indian woman. And in another case here in Saskatoon, again I was very young, it was about the same period, I had arranged to buy an old car for my father, and I went by myself to the dealer. And so the salesperson said he wants to join us for us to show you the car. They drove me to a field, the 2 of them, and then I realized what they were going to try and do. Thank God they decided to go and get beer first before they tried to party with me. And they drove back into the city to take out, and I just ran as soon as they went into the door to get beer. And that was my experience as a young woman in Western Canada. It was racism, not only misconception or cultural myth, but and I can imagine in your work you see a lot of that with young women or women of any age for that matter. Another cultural myth that I saw this week actually was I was listening to a presentation made by the former Prime Minister Paul Martin on the work that he's doing on Indigenous education, which is actually wonderful work. He's got a foundation totally focused on early childhood literacy for Indigenous people, training for entrepreneurship for Indigenous people, but also he thinks that, I guess the chief had asked, what tools what we need is for you to assist with tools, and he really focused on how early childhood is so important. 0 to 5 is when kids learn how to be resilient, and he said they thought about it, and in many cases they're single mothers that don't have mothers or aunties or grandmothers to teach them on how to care for their young, and they're providing funding for programs across the country to do that, and it's really important that people check that out. And I noticed that some of the projects they're doing are all across Canada, but not in Saskatchewan, so some people should actually start applying for that. It's called Martin Family Initiatives. But one of the questions that was asked of him was on economic development. And one of the questioners asked, do First Nations all, because he was proudly commenting about clear water fisheries, where the Micmac took over this major fishery in the Maritimes. And one of the questions was, do Indigenous people have the same opportunities economically? And he told them, he almost told them, but he didn't quite. He almost told them, you wouldn't ask that question if you were talking about municipalities, because think of it, someone in a municipality in Northern Ontario definitely would not have the same opportunities as one from Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. They have different municipalities, different populations, which brings up the greater infrastructures and brings in the dollars for the economy. So explain that to them. And I thought it was a very good answer, and it was out of ignorance, I think the question was asked, that they equate all of us as being similar in many ways, and that's a cultural myth or misconception.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing such vulnerable stories. Our last question we're going to end the evening with is talking about reconciliation. As many of you are aware, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation occurred on September 30th, 2021. I'm going to provide the panelists a series of questions just to help the audience relate and educate why this day is so important and why reconciliation is valuable. To begin, we're going to start with Darlene.